I'm going to call this to order now, and we'll do introductions to work session today with BLANKROME, presentation of Legislative Committee, Municipality of Anchorage. So these are our DC lobbyists, and so we'll go ahead and first do introductions.
George Martinez.
Karen Bronga.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera.
And on the phone, we have Ms. Zalatil.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And with BLANKROME, just so you know, to operate the mics, you press the light turns green, you leave it on, and then when you're done talking, red, so you don't have a hot mic and so people can hear you clearly. So go ahead and introduce yourselves as well.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the Assembly. We'll do brief introductions here in a moment. I'm CJ Zane. I'm here with two of my partners, Don Norden and Genevieve Cowan. We are three people in BLANKROME Government Relations as principals who work on municipal issues, muni issues, Municipality of Anchorage issues. We focused largely on the port, but not exclusively on the port over the past few years. We've been working for the muni since 2001 in one form or another through multiple mayors. And we're proud to be here, and we thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you and to give this report subject to our contract. But beyond what was required in the contract, we're just glad to have an opportunity to visit with you in person, which is always a treat for us. I used to live in Anchorage for many years. I was chief of staff for Congressman Don Young back in the day, but I'm now the managing principal of this group. I'll talk a little bit more about who we are and what we do for the muni and the port in a moment, but I want to let my colleagues, Don Norden and Genevieve, introduce themselves. So thank you. And I'm going to hit this button.
Hi, Genevieve Cowan. I've been with BLANKROME for about 5 years. I do infrastructure, transportation, renewable energy, and I've been working with the Muni for the last 5 years as well, since we've had the contract. And yeah, just thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to hearing what you all have to say too. Oh, before that, I worked on the Hill for 7 years with a joint committee on taxation. So the super nerds. We were very busy. Tax, unfortunately or fortunately, touches basically every policy area. So got a wide breadth of knowledge there. And yeah, my first time to Alaska was visiting my sister because my brother-in-law and her had moved up here. He was stationed at J-Bear, and my parents sent me up here for the summer while he was in Iraq and fell in love with it. And so luckily joining this firm, been able to work on Alaska issues for the last 5 years. So. Yep.
And I'm Don Norden. I've been working on Alaska issues since 1994 and Anchorage issues since 2001. A long time ago, as a younger man, I worked for a Democratic governor in Nebraska, Bob Kerrey, and later for a Democratic senator also from Nebraska, Jim Exon. Both states, Nebraska and Alaska, have long, cold winters, and the spelling even ends in ASKA. So anyway, I've learned to love Alaska, very similar states. Our firm has a number of Alaska clients. With that, I'll turn it back over to my friend CJ. Oh, CJ I have worked with for 30 years on one point or another. We used to be in separate firms, but we did so much together. I combined my firm into his. It makes it simpler for only one invoice.
All right, before we hand off of the presentation, I'm going to let Ms. Brawley speak briefly as the chair of the committee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we are having our briefing, as you said, and of course we focus a lot on state policy as well as federal policy. But the scope I know today is federal policy because that's the world that you guys occupy. And so we'll hear, as you said, updates on major issues like the port. If members have questions, we can certainly ask them, whether it's on items that we're specifically tracking, or I know there's other things on people's minds for sure. And then, of course, for you guys, as we said before we started, if there's things you can answer now, that's great. If you need to follow up, that is also totally fine. And then I also just want to briefly acknowledge, of course, we are in a major election year, right? Every 4 years we have a presidential election. We, of course, have big elections at our state level and congressional elections. And so just to say, we are not diving into those particular topics, but of course we acknowledge that who's in office and how people organize does make a big impact on policy. So we're really talking about the stuff that happens between elections or outside of elections. But I imagine that people may have some questions, or at least some maybe interesting kind of scenarios of what happens or what might be possible. So I'll just remind us that we are, of course, nonpartisan. We are, we are not engaging in electioneering at this point, but I know that topic might come up. So just wanted to say that briefly. And with that, I will turn it over to our folks at BLANKROME. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair of the committee. I'll just real quickly give for the assembly members who may not already know, a quick overview of our firm. BLANKROME Government Relations. We're a group of 20 professionals plus 4 staff. We're a bipartisan firm, so we have senior partner level folks in our firm who cut their teeth up on Capitol Hill in senior positions, staff for agencies or for members or committees on the Democratic side. But we also have roughly an equal number of people that held senior positions on Capitol Hill or with agencies or in elective office themselves on the Republican side. And why do we do that? Of course, because we have to work on both sides. And Anna made reference to it. Elections do matter. It matters for a number of reasons, not the least of which the control of one house or the other of the United States Congress can switch. It has many times in the history of our republic. And when those changes happen, changes in leadership occur. But we, as a firm, representing the Muni of Anchorage and the issues we work on for the port and the Muni, we need to be able to work with both sides of the aisle. We need to work with Democrats and Republicans, both in Congress and in their staffs and the committees of jurisdiction, or the committees that have control over the issues that are important to you, but also the federal agencies that implement what Congress passes and the rules and regulations that appertain thereto. So we are a bipartisan firm, and some of us in our group are attorneys, and some are not. Don is an attorney. I am not. Genevieve is not. But Joan Bondareff, Spence Abraham, who used to be a U.S. Senator from Michigan, is an attorney. About half of us are and about half of us are not. But we do not practice law. We do not put ourselves off as attorneys to practice law in front of a judge or even in a judicial administrative procedure. We are political consultants and government relations experts and lobbyists. We are wholly owned. We are a separate company. It's BLANKROME Government Relations LLC, but we are wholly owned by our law firm, BLANKROME LLP, and we work very closely, really on a day-to-day basis, seamlessly with our law firm colleagues. We have our mothership for the law firm is in Philadelphia, but we have good-sized offices in New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Houston, and Los Angeles, and there are some other smaller locations scattered around the country. So we work very closely with them. And we bring something that a lot of pure lobby shops can't bring, which is this synergy we have with our practice groups on the legal side. We've been able to work on a number of issues for the Muni over the years. We started in about 2001. We worked through successive mayoral administrations, and about the time we thought we might be let go by one or another, we were brought in, and not only were we not let go, in some cases, our scope of work was increased, and what we were asked to do for the Muni was increased. Most recently, we have been working on the port, very focused on the port. I think we've been as part of a team of people who've worked hard on the port issues, including the assembly, by the way, we've been able to contribute to some significant success recently with regard to at least 2 recent earmarks of about, they're $5 million apiece. Doesn't sound like a lot, but every little bit helps. And we were very much involved with the formation, review, and then the advocacy for on the political level from our delegation, our congressional delegation, Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, Representative Peltola, in support of the applications that the port makes for grants. Most recently was the PIDP $68.7 million grant. We all worked on that. I mean, everybody, I think, in this room and down at the port and Jacobs and you name it. But it was successful. And the delegation was having their shoulder to the wheel, including, by the way, and having folks visit here like Secretary Buttigieg and that kind of thing. That's all, sort of leverage, incremental leverage that gets you to a good place. The $68.7 million grant was awarded. And then, of course, there was the whole process of getting a grant funding agreement, completing the FONSI, the environmental documentation, getting MARAD to actually, after having said, the award was what the award was granted, in effect, you don't really get the money until you go through a bunch of more hoops. And there were a couple of snafus there, and the assembly played its role from our perspective anyway, very effectively in helping to smooth that out. And now, the FONSI was issued. The funds are being applied directly to the project. We had the privilege of going down yesterday to the port, and we were able to get a little bit of an update and a tour. Steve is out of town. We worked with Steve Rebuffo for a long time, many years. But Jim was there, Jim Jager, and he gave us a little update. And we went and saw the part of that $68.7 million at work, watching Manson do their thing on NES1. So I'll let my colleagues talk about some more specific things that we've done for the port and the Muni, but I think I've hit the high points there. But I will just add that we also have been involved in promoting, reviewing, and continuing to remind the Alaska Congressional Delegation and their staff and other members and committee staff how important the pending $102 million grant application is, for the momentum to keep the project going. So with that, I will turn it over to Don and Genevieve, but I can answer questions if there are any. Thanks.
So before we move on, I'll just note for the record that Mr. Littlefield was with us at the beginning of the meeting. I just didn't know that he was there. So he is here with us.
Great. So I know we went into kind of who we are on the team. This is the core team for the Muni. Maybe we should expand on the other members.
Can you turn the mic on? There you go.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
I went right into it. I hope my voice carried a little bit. So yes, we have a deep bench, a bipartisan bench that, depending on what the Muni needs, we know there are various issues. Our team has the expertise. I mean, right now we've been working with DOT, MARAD, DOD, Coast Guard, Army Corps of Engineers, HUD. So we know it spans the gambit, and we have the team to help. So I think just wanted to go in and expand on that a little bit and then go into some of the actions to date. Hand it over to Don.
Okay. By the way, you'll notice in the picture I had a mustache. My daughter informed me, Dad, at your age, it just makes you look older. It was gone in 60 seconds. CJ already talked about some of these issues. As you already know, getting that 68 million MERAD grant sprung loose was just, well, we could talk for hours about that, but all's well that ends well. The earmarks are in the process of being implemented. That next 5 million item, that's one where we arranged meetings with State DOT Commissioner Ryan Anderson for state flexibility to apply state FHWA, Federal Highway Administration funds, for a emergency access road in the port. So that's another angle which we came up with. That's now it has to go through the AMATS process. I'm not an expert on the AMATS process. You know more about that than I do. This next group, again, referring to the chart here, those are the pending Port of Alaska grant applications. The 102 million, that of course is the biggie. We hope to get word on that in September and October. We secured a congressional delegation support letter for that, but not putting
All three.
Yeah, of course, all three. But not putting all our eggs in one basket. You see these other items there. For example, Environmental Protection Agency, there's a grant pending for a port electrification project. The next item, unfortunately, we just got word yesterday, we did not win that Department of Defense Community Infrastructure Grant. And by the way, that 1.6 million is a typo, and that was my fault. Never put a lawyer in charge of preparing a PowerPoint presentation. The request was 12 billion. We were not successful this year, but we were successful in that grant category last year and won 10 million. And also a 5.5 billion port security grant pending. Those last three are not for the modernization project itself. However, money is fungible, and if you can find new areas and creative areas in the vast grant network of the federal government, the more the merrier. And then just to remind you, continuing actions we do, those are things we do on a regular basis. Next slide. Anna, you asked us just to give a quick picture on the federal budget. The House and Senate committees have all reported their versions of 12 appropriation bills. The House and Senate, again, are all over the map. I don't know what's going to happen. Well, they will come back in September. The Congress will have to punt and pass what's called a continuing resolution temporary spending authority because they won't finish the budget on time. There will be a lame duck session of Congress in December.
November.
Yeah, starting in November, but most of the action will be in September. What will happen will likely depend on how the elections go. For example, the House Freedom Caucus, which is the conservative part of the House Republicans, has taken the position just pass a status quo, no change budget into next year, or at least March 1st, because Donald Trump will become president, the Republicans will retain a House majority, and Republicans will take a Senate majority. As you know, there are varying views on what's going to happen in the elections, and it will be very close. That's one thing we know for sure, both for House majority, Senate majority, and for the presidency. It'll be very close, so we'll see. So Anna, to answer that question, I have no idea where it's going. Stay tuned.
Could I jump in?
Oh, sure.
I just want to jump in for a second because this is something that, I just want to put an exclamation point on what Genevieve and Don said. We don't know what's going to happen. There are a lot of prognostications out there. It looks like there's a better than even chance that the Senate will flip, go Republican. House is currently controlled by the Republicans, and I think there's also a very good chance it flips and the Democrats get control of the House. And there are other scenarios where both houses are in control of the Democrats and both houses are controlled by the Republicans. And then the whole White House question is I think too close to call. But all of that can make a difference, not only on what happens in the 119th Congress, the next Congress, which starts in January, but this idea of a lame duck session. The only thing I wanted to make sure the Assembly understood was that we are hearing from both Republicans and Democrats in Congress that a majority anyway, not necessarily on the fringes of either party, but the majority sort of more towards the middle of the Republicans and Dems do want to finish up FY25 appropriations bills this year. That doesn't guarantee that they will happen that way, but they will probably pass a CR for sure. Don was right. I mean, we're going to have a CR because they can't get the appropriations bills done by September 30th. But there seems to be a real desire to get the FY25 appropriations bills done, probably as an omnibus package or a couple of what they call minibus packages, so that whoever is in the White House and whoever is in control of the House and Senate next year, they can more or less start with a clean slate for FY26. What happens when people think, oh, let's wait because we won this majority or we won that majority or we won the White House, let's wait and kick everything over to the next year. What happens is you have a hangover. You have all this stuff that you haven't done from the year before, and it starts to crowd out the very important stuff you have to do for the current fiscal year, FY26, which begins, on October 1st. So we're hopeful that the FY25 appropriations bills will get done. And that's, I think, important for the muni. I think it's important for contractors. So we don't know that for certain, but we're cautiously optimistic and hopeful that the FY25 approps bills will get done before the end of the calendar year, God willing.
The next item, I know, which is a very important issue for Anchorage, the HUD continuum of care formula. Chris Constant, Anna Brawley, Mig Zolotel had a meeting at HUD headquarters in DC back on March 13th. Earlier, we had a favorable letter from HUD Secretary Fudge that she saw the unfairness of the formula for Anchorage and would do something to address it. Secretary Fudge has since resigned. There is no new confirmed HUD secretary. There's an acting secretary. Before Congress had recessed for the August recess, I went back to the various staff who attended the meeting at HUD with the assembly members in DC. And I have no new information to report, Chris and Anna and Meg, on some new HUD action. I wish I did. But if you're aware of anything, please add that.
So
now, when everybody's scattered, I may have missed something.
I'll be happy to brief you. We, through the coalition, had the new region director because that position already turned over. No, he's been back twice, and we've been having some pretty engaging conversations. The outcome of that is still to be determined, but we heard back from HUD through some channels, I think through the senator's office, maybe, that they are looking at the previous public comment period comments from, I think it was 2016, as the basis of their updates. And so it might be helpful to have a process where those get reviewed and we start to look at that. The problem with the 2016 comments is they wouldn't have ever addressed any of this because nobody raised it. And so, but that's the basis of their starting point. So it's at least what I've heard. Meg, I don't know if you have anything to add in relationship to HUD and the kind of conversation on the formula.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll tell you briefly that the COC funding opportunity just dropped, and it dropped as a 2-year funding opportunity, so FY24 and FY25, where it's setting the table for the interim rule to move into a final rule, so regulatory making, and we expect the formula to be a part of that. Similarly, we had an additional meeting after the one Mr. Constant was at, where Mr. Lofton was up for another time. And he's coming up again at the end of this month again. So I would say Alaska and Anchorage is getting very strong focus, but we've also received pretty clear feedback until the final rule comes through that the formula won't change. In the 24 and 25 funding opportunities, there is a cost of living increase to be taken, particularly for supportive services, and an increase in the fair market rent value. Thanks.
Anna?
Yeah, just a couple of brief additional points for you guys' benefit as well. So, and you know, we have the benefit of Member Zalatel being in her other role, right? The Coalition to End Homelessness, and so she, excuse me, and so she really brings that expertise from that lens. From the Assembly side, you know, there's just to note also that there's a couple conversation that she has not participated in on the city side. One of them is we just passed our amendment, I believe, or no, our action plan for HUD with our CDBG, ESG and home funds last Tuesday. Our typical process, and then our intent, and we passed a resolution saying this as well, is to open that back up and do a substantial amendment and really look at how to maximize and optimize our funds and consider how we can braid those funds with local funding like alcohol tax. And so one thing we heard from HUD was you guys aren't spending down all of your funding, right, that the municipality specifically gets. And so we are very focused on changing that and making sure that we are doing that, because again, you know, we will find that those are very small pots of money. They can do good things, but not nearly enough of what needs to be done in the community as a whole. So whether there's additional money to the muni or another organization, that is a big issue. So we are tracking that. And then also we are very focused on figuring out how to build more housing in our community. And I know I'll have a question later. I know there's been some discussion at HUD about that, and it's finally becoming a more federal focus, which is good. But there's a lot of work we're doing locally. So just to say, we are really trying to do as much as we can. And that is a message that we should be bringing back to others. Thanks.
And one last thing, Meg, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question for the lobbyists are, what engagement are you having around Build America, Buy America? We know that those federal dollars, even the ones we're slow to spend right now, we will soon not have some of the waiver provisions as BABA takes effect with HUD money. That could substantially chill development, particularly housing development that uses those funds. And so I'm curious to what extent you all are engaged in that question, and or if the municipality needs to be more engaged with you on that particular new requirement. Thank you.
We have been heavily involved in the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as the Jobs Act. If your particular question was on BABA, that's something I would like more information from the municipality on, both the MOA and the POA. We know BABA, Build American, Buy American, Buy American requirements, just to be clear for the record. That's one we would like some more information on, and we're happy to engage further on that. In terms of the vast amounts of federal money out there for the last several years and 2 more years to go, yes, we've been heavily involved in that, especially for the port, and as we indicated earlier on talking about the port issues. Did I answer your question correctly?
Yeah, I think we need to get together and have further conversations. Thanks.
Please.
Assemblymember Zalatel, this is CJ. We have been involved in the BABA issues. they're really important across the board. The Alaska delegation, as you know, is very mindful of this too, because they're hearing from people not only in the community and at port of Alaska, but also across the state on this issue about, it raises the cost of delivery of the projects. We've explored ideas with them about exemptions for non-contiguous states. But those are very difficult to get. In other words, a legislative or a statutory exemption from the Buy America, Build America requirements. There is, as you mentioned, a waiver process. Maybe there's fertile ground to be plowed about in extending the waiver or expanding the waivers, and maybe in some way continuing to talk with our delegation about some kind of exclusion or partial exclusion. They're open to it. They weren't able to get one for Build America, Buy America, but one of the more difficult requirements on the port side, for instance, were redundant benefit cost analyses that had to be done on these studies. The delegation was able to get language that would exempt from those requirements non-contiguous ports and DoD designated strategic seaports, of which the Port of Alaska is both. It's a non-contiguous port, and it's also non-contiguous with the lower 48. That's what that's all about. And then it is also a DoD designated strategic port. So the delegation is looking with us and others, your assembly members. I think they're open to thinking outside the box, but a wholesale exemption, from BABA, for instance, for Alaska, that's probably a very difficult thing to achieve, but doesn't mean you can't find another way to skin that cat, maybe nibble around those edges. So we would like to work with you on that.
Couple more questions or comments. I have myself in the queue, then Anna again. We're in discussions, and now, of course, Bill walked out, perfect timing, about hiring, coming up with a structure, staffing or contract grant writers, like creating a team. And so I'm looking forward to conversations about kind of effective targeting in terms of where we would apply resources, where we would deploy resources for applications. So just keep that on your list. And another thing that we've discussed on the port with both Tote and Matson is developing a unified lobbying effort with all of the lobbyists associated with the various organizations. Once we get to a point, we have the final plan of finance in order, and we kind of have a drive and understanding where we're going, is to bring all of the teams of lobbyists to work across all of the departments, kind of in the spirit of Ted Stevens back in the pre-statehood days and the kind of shadow delegations and working both sides. And so just keep that on your list of future initiatives. Anna?
Yeah, thanks. In the same spirit, Alaska Municipal League, that actually BABA or BABA came up from other communities as well. They are really struggling looking at how to meet those requirements. There was discussion of possibly a joint letter. So I'll be following up with our mayor. But just to say that this is something that I think all Alaska communities are really struggling with. And so I would expect that it's not just an Anchorage issue, and there might be more advocacy from many local governments. So to your point, heard that maybe a wholesale exemption is not possible, but I think there needs to be more discussion about what's feasible, given especially our much higher construction costs and fewer options than most other places. Thanks.
I'll just add quickly on BABA. The U.S. Department of Transportation published a proposed rule to exempt the Pacific Island territories from BABA, Guam, et cetera, the Marianas, because of the distance, the greater cost, et cetera. That rule was published. You would think, what's the big deal? It did get opposing comments. There is a very strong Buy American lobby, and they believe in the camel's nose under the tent, slippery slope, all those things. You give one exemption that's going to et cetera. However, seeing that opportunity when they issued the notice for public comment, I drafted a letter for former Mayor Bronson to send to Secretary Buttigieg, saying essentially, my executive summary here, hey, the non-contiguous states like Alaska and Hawaii have similar issues of distance, increased costs. Please consider that in the context of you're looking at the proposed exemption for the Pacific Island territories. Unless something was lost in the mayoral transition, as far as I know, that letter has not been responded to yet. But anyway, just we have looked at that, but just so you know, there's a lot of opposition. Okay, moving right along. One piece of good news under HUD. Look at the sub-bullet FY25 COC continuum of care appropriations. Look at the House number. This is pending now. Look at the House number and look at the Senate number. They're almost identical. They're almost, for all the big differences of the House Republican bills, which are passing by narrow partisan majorities, and the Senate majority Democratic bills. On continuum of care, the total amount, it's almost exactly the same. When I saw that, I went, wow. Now, there's subcategories and all that, but that is a piece of good news. Right below that, I compare the FY25 MARAD Port Infrastructure Development Program. Notice how the House cut it big time, like they did other infrastructure funds, but the Senate number is 3 times the House. That's been more typical in this appropriations process. But the continuum of care number, almost identical. Again, the homeless issues, it's a nationwide problem. I've seen it in my own home county of Arlington, Virginia. But that bipartisan consensus on the COC appropriations, that's a piece of good news.
So I'm going to jump in and say we have approximately 8 minutes left.
Yeah, exactly. So the city of Grants Pass, Oregon case, I just noted that question mark because I don't know if that's made a difference here or not, but we don't need to discuss that now. The last 2 items, Anna, those were bills you asked us to look at last time. On the first one, the Helper Act, nothing's changed. The bills were introduced, referred to committee, nothing's happened. However, on the second bill, the last item there, shortly before the August recess, notice the House version, HR 1776, was reported by committee to the House floor on July 26th. So that bill has legs. That bill could either be added in a bigger package or could be passed by unanimous consent, voice vote, and similarly in the Senate because it's not, it's a non-controversial bill, hopefully. With that, we want to be sure to leave time for other questions. Genevieve, the questions?
Mr. Chair, before we wrap up, questions? Yeah. Chair Constant, I want to just make a brief comment that I really, it's music to our ears to hear you talk about a coordinated effort for government relations and lobbying. It really does work. There has to be good communication, but we know the people. We know the folks that work for Mattson, Koo Park, and Daryl Connor. We've known those guys for a long time. Likewise with Tote and Salchuk, we work with them, and they're not the only other 2 that would be involved in a broader coordinated effort, but they are a couple of examples, and we think that it's a really good idea to do that, and we are team players. We really believe in that. We leave our egos at the door. It's like if whoever's best on the team to pursue one aspect of the overall goals, we're all about it, and we contribute in our own way to that as well. So thank you for that. I think we'd like to work with you on that. I know we would. So
And I think the real critical piece for that is arriving on a final plan of finance or as close to a final plan so that everybody's pushing the same book and it's all the same story and the same values and the same that way it's not like, two ships passing, to use a shipping metaphor. And so that's, I think, the critical juncture is once we get to an agreement with the parties, the muni, the port, the assembly, the operators, then we begin that full court press with all of our teams together. Anyone else? Anna?
Yeah, just briefly, I guess this isn't so much a question, although it could be responded to. As I mentioned, housing policy is a big issue, and I'm speaking for myself, not for the entire assembly or the committee. But I do see that there needs to be much more federal involvement, whether it's funding or policy, in the issues of housing and also in the issues of water and sewer funding. If you reflect on the fact that we have an entire system where every year, every state, every local government gets road funding. We have MPOs, we have all that structure. There is federal funding for water sewer. There is no equivalent for that. So what we do is we build roads without pipes under them. And for communities like ours that are relatively new, where places literally did not have pipes put in when they maybe should have 50 years ago, we are having to retrofit our city in a way that, legacy cities that are trying to replace 200-year-old pipe systems, it's a different set of issues. So I partly would just want to raise that, but also if you know of other ways that the feds are starting to look at housing construction or affordable housing, or really looking at that angle, as well as, rental affordability and homelessness and kind of the other end of that whole spectrum. That's something that I think that this city will continue to be interested in and working on. At least myself, I will be pushing for that. But I don't know if there's any other updates on that, or if you have ideas in the meantime of where we could start. Or I should say not start, but continue.
Well, I know, at least for water and sewer, I've seen that issue continue. The expansion of pipes and utilities is difficult to find funding for. Usually it's more for repairs. But that's also becoming an issue, and EPA is usually exploring those options. But I understand your frustration, because there's definitely a lot more money for repairs than actually expansion. I've seen certain communities use what was CARES Act funding or things like that to do kind of a repayment with certain utility companies. Like if they expand the utilities, they get a bit of money back, and I've seen that work well. But as far as federal funding, definitely keep an eye out for that.
All right, so we're down to 2 minutes. Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you. So I think there's two impressions I'd like to leave you all with in your kind of overarching principles around lobbying for us as a city. One is something Mr. Constant says, is Alaska was promised full statehood. And the way in which a lot of things were preset before we became a state, and our legacy formula funding, frankly, just doesn't work. Second, we're at the end of the supply chain, meaning our supply partners are often not those who are in the lower 48. And there is a real issue with that, and it drives the cost of everything. We are expected to do more with less, and we really need to be telling that story. Whether it's about the port and why our grants are at a higher dollar amount for maybe what is, not meeting the expectations of DOT because it is just more expensive to build, whether it is just the shipping costs associated with something. We just have these outlying costs, and we really need to be telling that story with the most unified voice we can, because in my opinion, as this federal money has been put out there, there are lots of federal dollars on the table, and a lot of them seem like they would be designed for us, but they're not. When we get into the fine print, or we're just not competitive, either we're not providing the kind of impact the federal government is wanting to see because we just don't have the population base, or two, it's just so much more expensive. And so to the extent that we can really be telling that story, not necessarily with regard to any one project, I think it's really important. I think we are just outliers in that way, even from Hawaii, because they just have a population base that's substantially different than ours. And so I just wanted to kind of leave you with that, because it's very frustrating.
Yeah, Member Zalatil, when an example comes to your attention, please pass it along to us. Recent example for the Port MARAD grants, the traditional cost-benefit analysis is very difficult for smaller ports like the Port of Anchorage. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. A year ago, a Amendment was added to the Myriad Grant Statute that exempts ports in non-contiguous states from the benefit cost analysis. That's huge for the Port of Alaska. Now, that's one grant program in one department, but if an example comes to mind where we could do or see if some rifle shot reform amendment is doable, sure, yeah.
Is our time up?
It really is. So
Okay.
we can just conclude and say thank you very much, and we'll be in touch. And it's nice that you're here in real time so members could see you. If you want to share your contact info with them, that's great. And we're adjourned. Thank you.